on the way out, why officials in Iraq are continuing to demand that U.S. soldiers leave the country. Getting ready. New developments in the timeline for the Senate to begin its impeachment trial of President Donald Trump. Message of love. Pope Francis tells the faithful why they should cherish their brothers and sisters. And away in a manger. We take you inside of a church in Rome with a unique relationship to the birth of Christ. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, January 10th, 2020. Good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. The U.S. announces a new round of sanctions on Iran. It follows this week's Iranian missile strike on U.S. bases in Iraq. Today, the White House said that it would take appropriate action following the downing of a Ukrainian jetliner in Iran. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Mark?
Tracy, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin gave a briefing today here at the White House. Secretary Pompeo joining other world leaders saying blame for that Ukrainian plane crash likely falls on the shoulders of Iran.
We do believe that it's likely that that plane was shot down by an Iranian missile. We're going to let the investigation play out before we make a final determination. It's important that we get to the bottom of it.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo commenting on the Ukrainian jet that crashed outside Tehran this week, hours after Iran launched ballistic missiles at U.S. military bases in Iraq.
The plane has not been hit by a missile.
Iran denies the allegations made by other world leaders. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau blames Iran, adding the strike may have been unintentional. But the missile attack on U.S. troops in Iraq was intentional, and the U.S. is rolling out more sanctions on Iran.
Against any individual owning, operating, trading with, or assisting sectors of the Iranian economy, including construction, manufacturing, textiles, and mining.
Democrats have criticized the Trump administration for calling threats posed by Iranian General Qasem Soleimani imminent. Soleimani was killed by a U.S. drone strike last week. At a rally in Ohio last night, President Trump defending his decision to strike Soleimani without congressional approval.
We got a call. We heard where he was. We knew the way he was getting there. And we had to make a decision. We didn't have time to call up Nancy, who was not operating with a full deck.
The president critical of Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi there, who called the killing of General Soleimani provocative and disproportionate. Soleimani's death has reignited a debate in Washington here over who has the authorization to use military force. Tracy.
All right, White House correspondent Mark Irons, thank you tonight. Well, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says that she will send the articles of impeachment to the Senate as soon as next week. Pelosi faced mounting pressure from lawmakers in both parties to release the articles more than 3 weeks after the House impeached President Trump on charges of abuse and obstruction. Catholic news agency's Matt Hadra reports now from Capitol Hill.
Tracy, in a letter to her Democratic colleagues, Speaker Pelosi tells the House to get ready to appoint impeachment managers and to transmit the articles of impeachment to the Senate.
No, I'm not holding them indefinitely. I'll send them over when I'm ready. And that will probably be soon.
As soon as next week. The Speaker's news comes after Senate Republicans refused to budge. And Lindsey Graham said the upper chamber was ready to go ahead without her.
She's trying to control the Senate. We'll have a trial. Everybody will get to vote for witnesses or not vote for witnesses. And the president will have his day in court, and so will the House managers.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell tweets yesterday, Speaker Pelosi has created growing bipartisan unity in opposition to her own reckless games with impeachment. McConnell also announced he was co-sponsoring a GOP resolution calling for an update to Senate rules to dismiss the articles of impeachment for failure by the House of Representatives to prosecute such articles if they are not sent over within 25 days. But if Pelosi keeps her word, the Senate trial can proceed without further delay, and members of the Speaker's party remain firm in their support.
She knows a lot more about where that strategy is going than I do, and I'm willing to let her play that out.
Democrats have argued Republican senators are not preparing for a fair impeachment trial under the instruction of Majority Leader McConnell.
He's coordinating with the White House. He's apparently not going to call witnesses, not going to have an open process. So I absolutely support calling attention to Mitch McConnell's unfair process in the Senate. At some point, I do think we have to send them over, but I'm willing to wait to see how that strategy plays out.
Speaker Pelosi tells her colleagues she will consult with them at Tuesday's regular House Democratic Caucus meeting to discuss how best to proceed. At the Capitol, Matt Hadro, EWTN News Nightly.
The Democratic-controlled House on Thursday approved a war powers resolution. The resolution passed by a margin of 30 votes. 8 Democrats voted against it and 3 Republicans voted in favor of it. The non-binding resolution states President Trump must seek approval from Congress before taking further military action against Iran. A similar proposal faces an uphill fight in the Senate. Joining me now is Congressman Francis Rooney, Republican from Florida and former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See. Congressman, welcome back and thanks for joining us.
Tracy, thanks for having me on again.
You voted for yesterday's resolution to limit President Trump's authority to use military force against Iran. What led you to make that decision?
I did. I think given the limited success that we've had with military conflict in the Middle East, that we have to find a better solution. And I'm very sensitive to the asymmetry which exists between the people of Iran's desires and the government that doesn't seem to want to provide for them. And I know from a fact that we have very high market share in our broadcast in Farsi into the country, and that we continue to receive tweets and social media from disaffected people in Iran. And I think we need to leverage that and apply more of a containment strategy like worked for us in the Cold War.
Yeah, the measure's non-binding, and most of your Republican colleagues voted against it. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy called it a, quote, meaningless vote. So what message do you think that sends?
Well, I think it's meaningful in the sense that it expresses at least a certain number of people feel that non-military, diplomatic-oriented, intelligence-based solutions are better and have a higher prospect of success.
Right. And as a former diplomat, what do you see as the way forward with Iran?
Well, again, I think we need to continue to exploit the asymmetries between the people and the government. The people need to know that we are there, that we have high-minded principles, and that they can count on us. And if, as, and when they ever manage to change the government of the mullahs, we want to have all the bridges we can to the people.
Yeah, and before we let you go, the Senate awaits the delivery of the articles of impeachment. Now, you voted against the impeachment of President Trump. What are your thoughts as you watch this all play out?
Well, I did, but I voted for it or against it for some different reasons than others. I tried very much to get the leadership to slow down the process and call the first-hand witnesses like Ambassador Bolton, Giuliani, Pompeo, and Mulvaney, and get all the first-hand testimony they could, because impeachment is such a grave remedy. And they didn't want to do that, and so they just went right ahead. But I think that they need to call witnesses in the Senate. They need to find out all the facts possible on whether there's something substantive or not.
Any final thoughts for our viewers tonight, Congressman, when it comes to the impeachment? Anything you want to maybe expound upon a little more?
Well, I would just say that impeachment's a grave, grave matter. It has huge institutional impact on our country and our Constitution, and it shouldn't be taken lightly. So even though the technical requirements for a crime could may arguably be made, I don't think you stop there. I think for something this serious, you should get all the evidence you can. Look at Watergate. They kept grinding it out till they got all the evidence possible, and the investigation took its own course. You never know where these are going to go till you start uncovering firsthand testimony.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you again for joining us, Congressman. We really appreciate it. Congressman Francis Rooney, Republican from Florida. Thank you.
Thank you.
Best-selling author Marianne Williamson has dropped out of the Democratic presidential race. Williamson says that she didn't want to make it tougher for a progressive candidate to win. She struggled in fundraising since launching her campaign last year and was barely registering in the polls. Her decision now leaves 13 candidates remaining in the primary. Thousands of people are fleeing their homes in order to escape the wildfires in Australia. Helicopters dropped water onto the raging fires, but there is mounting danger for people in the southeastern part of that country. Rising temperatures and high winds are causing the flames to spread. Thousands of homes have been destroyed in the wildfires. Catholics gathered near the Jordan River today to celebrate the baptism of Christ. More than 2,000 pilgrims prayed in the church located near the eastern bank of the river. Priests blessed people with holy water from the Holy River, and parishioners prayed and sang together. According to the tradition, the site is where John the Baptist baptized Jesus. For the first time ever, the world leaders of the Vincentian family are meeting in Rome to celebrate their 400 years of their charism. The Vincentian family is made up of 150 branches of lay associations and congregations. It consists of 2 million members in more than 150 countries. The organization began with St. Vincent de Paul in 1617. One of their main initiatives is the Famvin Homeless Alliance, an international charity supporting homeless and marginalized people. Mark McGreevy, International Coordinator of the Famvin Homeless Alliance, joins us now from Rome. Thank you so much for joining us, Mark. Can you explain to us some concrete projects the Famvin Homeless Alliance is working on right now?
Yeah, well, this all started around about 400 years ago with Vincent de Paul in 1643. He was faced with lots of orphans on the street of Paris, about 1,800 orphans on the street. He wanted to do something about it. And as luck would have it, Louis XIII left him the equivalent of $1 million in his will. And with that, he bought 13 houses in Paris to house these young children and babies and managed to pretty much resolve the problem in Paris of these children sleeping on the streets. And what we're doing 400 years later to celebrate the 400th anniversary of the charism of Vincent de Paul is we're building 13 houses in 151 countries in which the Vincentian family works across the world.
That's wonderful. Mark, there are 1.3 billion people living on the street or in unsuitable housing around the world, and about 100 million with no housing at all. What are the biggest obstacles that you face in finding places for all these people?
Well, generally, it's a mixture of things. I mean, when we look at that figure of 1.2 billion, around 860 million of them are slum dwellers, and for them it's a question of what we can do to make those slums habitable, to build proper housing for people. In relation to refugees, 70 million refugees across the world, it's a different problem. We've got to think about what we can do to empty these camps and give people a secure place to live and to welcome them where we can into the countries where they can have a place of safety. For street homeless people, it's a really, really mixed answer, this one. We have to think about the individual in front of us. Everybody has a different story, whether it's somebody with an alcohol problem, somebody with a mental health problem, a young person that's run away. So the more that our services can be flexible to meet those needs, the more that we can help them.
Okay, one quick last question before we let you go. This global meeting in Rome is a historic event for the Vincentian family. What opportunities have you been discussing for the future?
Well, we're talking about the fact that at the moment the world is changing, and the same is true of the Vincentian family. So our opportunities in relation to Europe and to America is, we're looking to make sure that as maybe religious orders decline in numbers, we maintain these great works of charity and the spirituality that underpins them into the future. But in relation to Asia, to Africa, to other parts of the world, the church is growing. And we have a real opportunity to make sure that we're part of that growth and make sure that we serve the poor in those countries as well.
Wonderful. Well, Mark McGreevy, International Coordinator of the Famvin Homeless Alliance, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much indeed.
Coming up, why Catholic dioceses will be paying a little more money to the U.S. Bishops' Conference. And we hear about an initiative to raise awareness to human trafficking. Tomorrow marks National Human Trafficking Awareness Day here in the United States. The purpose is to bring attention to an issue that has impacted communities across the country and has been described as modern-day slavery. While there is no official estimate of the total number of human trafficking victims in the U.S., the National Human Trafficking Hotline says more than 49,000 cases have been reported to the hotline in the last 10 years. Joining me now by Skype from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, is Dr. Brooke Parker-Bello. She is a victims' rights advocate and the author of several faith-based books on the subject of human trafficking. Brooke, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Well, we know that you are a survivor of sexual abuse and trafficking. How did your experience inspire you to become an advocate?
I think when I fell out of human trafficking when I was rescued. I was such a young girl. By the time I got out, I was not the same straight-A student, athlete. And I ended up meeting actor John Voight, went to acting school, and I became a filmmaker and an actress. And in Hollywood, I had just obviously established a relationship with God, then therapy. I needed all these things to heal. And Hollywood is not necessarily a good place to tame rebellion when you haven't discovered your identity and you don't understand that you've been trafficked, as most victims don't. And so with all of the Me Too stories there and all of the things that I was asked to do, they sort of had triggers in my heart and in my soul. And I knew at that point, I'm going to have to leave this extraordinary dream, even though I thought that would save me, to do something different. And I made a promise to myself when I was 15 years old, and I was this young teen girl in a brothel being passed around the room, that if I ever got out of this, and if there is a God, and I ever got out of this, I would help girls and boys like me. And so I began to heal, and I started to do that right away.
That is wonderful. You're the founder of the organization More to Life. What services do you provide, and how many people have you helped so far?
More to Life, over the last 15 years, has assisted over 5,000 victims of human trafficking. We work with the Open Doors Outreach Network, and so most of the victims we work with, about 62%, are under the age of 17. We work with victims as young as 5 years old, not just in Florida, but around the world and around the country. The services we provide, whether it's tutoring, housing, therapy, mentoring, life plans, most of our graduates and the victims that come through our organization takes a good 3 to 7 years before they leave the program, because people forget the difficulty of human development and identity discovery after repeated rapes and violence.
Brooke, before we go, quickly, what steps should people take if they suspect that someone's being trafficked?
I think you have to call 1-888-37-37-888. You have to connect with an organization within your community and learn the red flags. We don't have enough time to go over them, but even if you go to polarisproject.org or the Department of Justice, State Department, Homeland Security, Blue Campaign, there's a bunch of online red flags. You can go to More to Life, MORETOO life.org. We send out a curriculum. As a Google Next Gen policy leader, I'm working on innovative technology that is virtual and machine learning to combat human trafficking. We're excited about that. So look for some new tech innovations and just stay in the fight. Trafficking is not about race, creed, or color. It has its propensity to affect all children in all communities globally. And there's something everybody can do to end it.
Wonderful. Dr. Brooke Parker-Bello, thanks for joining us. Thank you for what you're doing and sharing your story.
Thank you, Tracy. Happy New Year. Bye-bye.
A lawmaker in Nebraska has introduced a bill that would ban a common procedure for second trimester abortions. The measure would make an exception for cases where the mother's life is at risk. Also in Nebraska, Republican Governor Pete Ricketts declared the anniversary of Roe v. Wade as a statewide day of prayer. Roe v. Wade is the landmark Supreme Court decision on January 22, 1973, that declared abortion legal in the United States. Catholic dioceses in America soon will be paying a little more money to the U.S. Bishops' Conference. The diocese will pay 3% more starting next year. The measure initially failed to pass the USCCB November meeting. Bishops then held a second vote by mail. The total collected is around $25 million per year. It funds administrative, pastoral, and public policy programs. Today is the feast of Blessed Sister Anna of the Angels. Sister Anna was born in Peru in the 17th century. She entered religious life after receiving a vision of St. Catherine of Siena. Pope St. John Paul II beatified Anna on February 2, 1985, while on a papal visit to Peru. Sister Anna died on this day in 1686. Up next, Pope Francis tells the faithful the best way to express their love for one another. And we take you inside of a church in Rome with a relic relating to the Nativity. A surrogacy bill introduced in New York is being called dangerous by the state's Catholic bishops. The legislation, which seeks to legalize surrogacy, has been criticized not only by Catholics, but also by some secular feminist groups. Here to talk more about this is Dr. Michael Parker, president of the Catholic Medical Association, and he joins us now by Skype from Columbus, Ohio. Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us.
Well, Tracy, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening.
First off, I think let's start with the church's position on surrogacy. Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Well, the church's teaching stems from its teachings also on in vitro fertilization. If you understand Catholic teachings, we know that children are to be conceived through the natural marital act between a husband and a wife. And when we separate that unity between the husband and wife, it becomes immoral within the church. That leads then to surrogacy. When we have embryos that are created outside of the marital union and are being held in a petri dish or in suspended animation, being frozen, then those embryos can be transferred to someone who is not the parent of that child. We as Catholics believe that all children receive their dignity and worth at the moment of conception. And so that child really becomes immoral, not the child itself conceived through these methods. We don't have a good disposition for what to do with them, but surrogacy becomes immoral because it separates the husband and the wife from creating the child within their marriage.
What's your concern about this particular bill as a Catholic and as a doctor?
Well, I have several concerns. First off, for the woman, this woman basically just becomes an incubator for children. And it can lead to exploitation of these women by wealthy individuals and couples who are seeking to have children and are not able to have children. It also raises concerns because this woman is placing herself at risk of medical complications associated with pregnancy. And those risks are not inconsequential and can even be fatal, as we know with regards to the high mortality rate associated with pregnancy here in the United States. It also, takes away that dignity of the woman and but of the child also, because this child now becomes a commodity. This child has no right. It can be bought and sold. In earlier times, we called this slavery. The other concern that I have is it could lead to forced abortions. When these children are conceived, we don't know what's going to happen during their development. And if anything abnormal is seen with the baby, such as a birth defect or some type of genetic abnormality, what's going to be who's going to make the decision as to what to do with this child? Is it going to be the surrogate mother, or is it going to be the people who have purchased this embryo or who have placed the embryo within the surrogate?
Dr. Parker, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
No, it's my pleasure. The Catholic Medical Association has some very strong stance on being pro-life, and we're always wanting to speak out on issues related to life and these matters which are going to affect not women, children, and families.
Pope Francis says it's impossible to love God but not your brother or sister.
Amare la concretezza, l'amore concreto.
At his daily mass at the Vatican, the Holy Father says affection is expressed through concrete actions, and he urges the faithful to dirty their hands in works born of love. He also says it's easy to love God because God loves us first and always. And finally tonight, there are hundreds of Catholic churches in Rome, but one of them has a significant tie to the birthplace of Christ. Our Vatican Bureau Chief, Alan Holdren, tells us more.
Rome's Basilica of St. Mary Major is connected as no other church outside of Bethlehem itself with the Nativity of Jesus. It keeps a key relic of the first Christmas, the manger. EWTN's biblical scholar, Father Mitch Pacwa, shares his account.
Now, when we're dealing with the manger, it's important to know a little bit about the background in Bethlehem. The Christians in the Holy Land were well aware of the place of the birth of Jesus. There is one big cave in the center of Bethlehem that was used as a stable. And they went there from the earliest times. Well, the Christians remembered where the cave was. And when St. Helena came to the Holy Land around 325, she asked, where's the tomb of Jesus? They pointed it out. And then where's the place of his birth? And they pointed to it. Being the emperor's mother, she ordered the 2 pagan temples to be taken down. And sure enough, under the pagan temple in Jerusalem was the Calvary and the tomb of Jesus. Under the pagan temple in Bethlehem, there was the cave.
The fact that the basilica keeps the relics of the Nativity was once reflected in the very name of the church. Since the 7th century, it was also called the Basilica Santa Maria ad Presepium, which literally means Saint Mary at the crib.
And we can celebrate Christmas in either the Holy Land or here in Rome and have a sense of contact with something that belonged to Christ, where his birth announces good news and peace to all people of good will.
Still, last year, the president of Palestine, Mahmoud Abbas, visiting the Vatican, requested the Holy Father for the possibility of returning the relic of the Holy Manger from Rome to Bethlehem. And this year, Pope Francis sent a fragment of the relic to the Franciscan custody of the Holy Land to place it in Bethlehem at the Church of St. Catherine, right next to the Church of the Nativity.
We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. We're back on Monday with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.